He orders his men to bound the prisoners and then begins beheading them in full view of Saladin's camp. Upon seeing the public execution of their brothers, Saladin's men charge up the hill to save them, but the Crusaders fight them off and force them to watch as they cut off the heads of each prisoner one by one until every single last one is dead. Saladin is enraged and in retaliation orders the immediate execution of his 1,600 Christian prisoners. An eye for an eye, and the rivalry that will make legends of the two men is off to a very disturbing start. With Accra secured, Richard begins to march his men towards the ruined city of Jaffa, which is about 80 miles away. His goal is to set up a string of fortresses that can be used to supply his men for their eventual push to Jerusalem. Saladin gets word from his scouts that Richard is traveling along this coastal path, and he begins planning an attack to wipe out Richard and the Crusaders before they reach the city. Now, Richard was arrogant, impulsive, and kind of a dick, but he was no idiot. He knew that extreme heat and lack of water were the key factors that led to the Crusaders' defeat at Hattin. So he has supply ships running the coast, constantly bringing his troops fresh water and supplies from Accra throughout their march. He also chose a path that allowed the sea to protect his flank. But unknown to Richard, Saladin watched the Crusaders from a distance, concealed in the wooded hills, waiting for the perfect time to strike. As Richard marched his men south, Saladin would periodically send his mounted archers out on hit-and-run attacks at vulnerable stretches of the road. The Christians are heavily armed and can defend against the light arrows, but these attacks take out their horses, and this slows them down. As Richard travels along the road, Saladin expertly moves his men in the cover of the woods, pacing with the Crusaders. Richard is oblivious to just how many Muslims are waiting in the shadows to attack him, until the morning of September 7, 1191, when they near the ruined city of Arsuf. Richard is getting his men into formation to continue their trek when war drums and trumpets cut through the still morning air, and thousands of mounted archers screaming their battle cries begin to charge towards the Crusaders. The Christians look up to the wooded hills, and the full might of Saladin's army emerges from the shadows, and soon their numbers black out the horizon. Over 25,000 men. Richard's army is less than half the size at around 12,000. Like waves cresting over the hills, Saladin's archers swarm the Crusaders and launch a heavy barrage of arrows. The Crusaders defend themselves, but more of their horses and pack animals are killed. Richard commands his army to position themselves into a defensive formation and begin returning crossbow fire while continuing to move towards Arsuf. Saladin's army bears down on the Crusaders, and their march slows to a near standstill. Arrows continue to rain down on the Christians, and the Knights Hospitallers in the rear are getting the worst of it.
Richard, come on, bro, let us hold!
The young king carefully watches the movements of the Muslim soldiers, and he's suddenly stricken with terror as he realizes what the Sultan is trying to do.
My God, Saladin's tactics are designed to break our formation. If any part of our line retaliates, it will create a gap, and he will send cavalry into the opening. They will slaughter us from the inside out. The victory at Hattin was not a fluke. If I make a single mistake now, the cost will be the lives of every Christian.
Richard, bro, look, they shot more of our horses. Come on, man, you got less fight back. Hold!
The full force of the Muslim army bears down on the Crusaders, who are now pinned to a standstill and growing frustrated that Richard is holding them back. Sensing victory is at hand, Saladin rides behind his men, shouting words of encouragement over the drums, and the Muslims respond with increased ferocity. The archers begin to dismount and increase their rate of fire, and Richard and his men are completely trapped. Saladin's infantry then begin their march towards the Crusaders to finish them off. Seeing this, the Hospitallers again demand to charge, but Richard again instructs them to hold and wait for the signal.
This is some fucking bull. Yeah! Taste my steel, you dirty Saracen!
Oh, for f***'s sake.
The Knights Hospitaller cannot take it anymore and break formation. They charge directly at the advancing Muslim force. More of the Crusaders follow their lead, and Richard realizes it's now or never. He had held his troops back as long as he could, and finally, he gives the signal for a full counterattack. The Crusaders' trumpets blare 6 times, and in unison, the Knights charge at full speed towards Saladin's men. The Muslims had been attacking the Crusaders for hours unanswered and had slipped into a false sense of security, and they're startled by the faces of the Christians who are now charging directly at them. Like tortured, caged animals who had finally been set free, the Crusaders roar and begin ruthlessly slaughtering Saladin's forces. Richard and his heavy cavalry smash into the archers, and in the blink of an eye, Saladin watches as his victory is snatched from his hands. He and his generals stand in disbelief as his men stream past them fleeing in terror. Richard is leading the cavalry from the front and engages personally in savage hand-to-hand combat. The Sultan regains his composure and sees that the Crusaders have lost themselves to bloodlust. He quickly comes up with a counter-strategy and orders a full retreat into the woods. If he can lure the Christians into the shadows, he can regroup his men and ambush them. The Muslims race into the cover of the trees with the Crusaders in hot pursuit. But just as they begin to charge blindly into the woods, Richard commands them to stop. The Christians, against all odds, manage to fight back their instincts to continue the chase and stop themselves just short of Saladin's trap. The Sultan watches from the shadows as his strategy is again defeated for the second time today.